Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is the Current Podcast. Well, it would appear that Donald Trump, U.S. President Trump, is getting his way. Once again, another automaker has announced plans to expand production in the United States and pulled back on plans to build vehicles here in Canada. This time, it was Stellantis. The company was planning to build a new generation of Jeeps in Brampton, Ontario. Now, those plans are off, and instead, the company says it's going to expand production in Illinois, leaving over 3,000 auto workers from the Brampton assembly plant wondering if they will have a job. The company had been retooling that plant for both electric and gas Jeep Compass vehicles and was supposed to start production later this year, but it stopped that project in February after Trump's tariff threats. Vito Beato is the president of Unifor Local 1285 that represents Stellantis workers in Brampton. Vito, good morning.
Good morning.
How did you first learn that Stellantis was going to pick up sticks and move to Illinois?
Well, listen, it was on Tuesday at about 4:45 when the company brought us into a meeting to let us know about this $13 billion investment to the U.S. and that our Jeep Compass would be moving to Illinois. Also, at that time, they told us that they will let the media know at 5 p.m. and they would do a robocall to our members, their employees, shortly after that.
A robocall saying essentially, we're leaving.
It was robocall saying about the investment and the Compass going to Illinois. So when you think about that and you think about, we've been going through a retool that started on January 2024, an EV transition retool, and that was paused on February 20th of this year. And then the first time they communicate with their employees is Tuesday, letting them know that this Compass is now going to Illinois. So very disrespectful and disgusting behavior by the company. And our members don't deserve that. All they've done over the years is, over 40 years now at that plant, is build great products, do what they were asked to do, and give big, huge profits to this company. So we deserve to be building cars there. Our members do deserve to build cars and do what they do best and build cars in Brampton.
Disrespectful and disgusting is how you phrase it. The Brampton assembly plant has been idle since 2023, as we mentioned, for retooling. That project stopped in February. What, if anything, did Stellantis say about why not only were they pausing work, but why they were making that big investment in the States?
So they did say why, and they did say it had to do with tariffs, and it did say the feasibility of the Brampton assembly plant is in question or not good anymore. So that was their reason, and that's what they told us. And listen, we need zero tariffs. We need the government to step up here. We need a world that has zero tariffs. We don't need the government piecemealing our sectors. We need the government to use the leverage that we have in our sectors and not sacrifice the auto industry, because we can see right now what is happening, how the U.S. and the Trump administration is getting the investment in the States. And if they get away with this in Brampton, it's just going to snowball to other manufacturing facilities in Ottawa and other sectors right across the province and the country. So we need to stand up. We need to stick up for this. We're not taking this lightly, and we're going to make sure Brampton is building cars.
What are you telling your members? I mean, they're worried about the fact that they could be out of a job soon.
Yes, our members are very worried, very anxious, and we talk to them every day. But since Tuesday, it's been very more frequently than ever. And we're going to have a plan in place, and we're going to get that going. And we're digesting the information right now, and we're going to make sure that we get a plan and get cars in Brampton and build cars in Brampton.
As you understand it, what does Stellantis owe those workers in Brampton? And I ask in part because the federal and provincial governments, we're looking at something like $15 billion in performance incentives going to Stellantis, but part of that was around the fact that they had to be, fulfilling production mandates in Brampton itself. So what does that tell you about what you believe the company owes your workers?
They owe us to build cars in Brampton. We've done nothing but provide profits to this company. The investment that the government and Stellantis is putting in to Brampton, Windsor, and the Nexstar battery facility plant, that goes hand in hand with all the facilities. It doesn't go just for Windsor or just for the battery plant. It goes for all three. So we're expecting product there. We're expecting investment there, and we're expecting to build cars there. That's what our members deserve, and that's what the company owes us.
And Stellantis has said, that the workers are important and they have plans. They haven't said what those plans are, but they have plans for Brampton. What are those plans, do you think?
I wish I knew, because when we had that meeting on Tuesday, they never told us about any plans. And how they're talking to the federal government what they're saying about these big plans for Brampton, they should be talking to Unifor as well, because we have no idea about these plans right now.
Melanie Joly is the federal minister of industry. Have a listen to what she said yesterday about what the federal government is going to do to ensure that Stellantis honors its commitments.
The company has commitments under different types of agreements with the government, including the fact that we provided support for the retooling of the very Brampton facility that right now is sitting idle.
What do you want from the federal government?
Well, so that was breaking up a little bit, Matt, so my apologies. But I do know the statement that Melanie Joly put out, the minister, and I did see the news there of what she said, and it's spot on. We like what she said. We agree with what she's saying, and we need the government to act just the way she's acting right now and make sure we have a tariff deal that doesn't divide our sectors and it has zero tariffs. So we like what she's saying right now.
CBC is reporting that the federal government is threatening to sue Stellantis. Do you think that's enough to bring production back to the plant in Brampton?
No, we need more action than that. That's definitely a good step, and we need to fight back, because when you get punched, you got to punch back. So, yeah, we need that's the first step of many steps that we need to make sure that Brampton is protected and we build cars there.
If you get punched, you got to punch back. That seems to be the message of the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford. Have a listen to what he said yesterday.
What my message to the Prime Minister when I meet him on Thursday is, if you can't get a deal, let's start hitting him back. Let's start hitting the U.S. back hard, because all Trump does is continue. We're nice, play nice in the sandbox, and I am sick and tired of sitting and rolling over. We need to fight back.
What does, and I don't know if you know what that means, but what does fighting back look like for your members, Vito?
Well, I think the Premier is spot on. When you're dealing with an administration and the President of the United States that is flippy-floppy and doesn't have a consistent way of doing things, you gotta fight back. You got to make sure that you use your leverage at the bargaining table and use your leverage to make sure that, listen, we're not messing around here. We want zero tariffs. We've had an auto industry that's been for over 100 years. It's been working for over 100 years, and we don't need to change anything. And zero tariffs is what we want. So you got to fight back, and you got to stand up for Brampton Assembly Plant, the auto industry, this province, and this country.
One of the things I've heard from other folks in your industry is the idea that if people want to sell cars here, they need to build them here. And if they're not going to build them here, then they can't sell them here. Is that an idea that you support?
100%. I mean, if you're going to sell here, you got to build here. That's a standard practice we've been saying right back to when the auto industry was here, and the Auto Pact was part of that. And that's what we need to do. Is if companies want to sell here, they need to build here, because Stellantis got a lot of business here in Canada, so they should maintain their production facilities here in Canada as well.
Do you think that's realistic now? I mean, Donald Trump, whether you like him or not, Donald Trump seems to be winning.
It is realistic when you think about it. It's been over 100 years, this industry. They are going to hurt in the States just as much as we're going to hurt here. It makes no sense to do what he's doing. I mean, you think about their president way back, Ronald Reagan, and there's ads right now from the provincial government talking about how tariffs don't work. So it does make sense. It doesn't make sense for us to have tariffs. We need a trade agreement that allows us to do what we've been doing for the past 100 years.
I'm going to let you go, but we're about to hear from an economist, an economics professor, who says that in the long term, we should think about whether the money that the government pours in is actually worth it. And if it's not, if we can't hang on to these industries, that we need to phase out the auto sector. What do you say to people who will argue that there may not be a future for this industry in this country, given the times that we're living in right now?
Well, I'd like to sit down with these people that are saying that, because the auto industry has been integral to this province and this country from day one. They provide a lot of tax base there. We have major communities throughout this province and this country that are vibrant because of the auto industry. And when you remove the auto industry and those facilities from those communities, and then GDP drops, restaurants, hair cutting places, hardware stores, you name it, all those facilities that are affected and tied to the manufacturing facilities drop and go away, and then you see communities just not vibrant anymore. So I'd like to challenge any of these people that say these things and sit at the table with them for sure.
Vito, good to speak with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.
Vito Beato is the president of Unifor Local 1285. It represents Stellantis workers in Brampton, Ontario. The move by Stellantis is just the latest blow to the auto sector in this country. And as we say, that has some observers wondering how long that sector can survive and if it might be smarter to think about phasing out a domestic auto industry. One of the people making that case is Christopher Worswick. He is a professor of economics at Carleton University. He's in our Ottawa studio this morning. Christopher, good morning to you.
Good morning.
That's a provocative idea. Why should Canada look at phasing out its auto manufacturing industry?
Well, let me just start by saying I'm very sympathetic to what the previous speaker was saying. I think this is incredibly difficult for the workers involved, and it must seem so unfair because it's not driven by a lack of competitiveness. It's driven by, U.S. erratic trade policy. But I originally made this argument in a Globe and Mail opinion piece back in March when there was a lot of talk about bailing out the auto sector in Canada. And the main point that I wanted to raise was that Australia decided to get rid of their domestic auto sector. And by 2017, I believe there were no cars being built in Australia. And my main point was to say that this is an option for Canada. Now, we do have a very successful integrated trading arrangement for automobiles and auto parts with the U.S., but it isn't essential to having a high GDP per capita. We have a lot of, the auto sector represents about 1%, even less than 1% of Canadian GDP. So it's not a huge part of the Canadian economy.
And if you take a look at Australia, what impact did phasing out auto production have on that country's economy?
Well, the economy's done very well. I think as the previous speaker said, it's going to have big local impacts. And part of policy, if this were to happen, would be, you would need to retrain workers, support local industries. In my piece, I argued that there are sectors in the Canadian economy where there's a shortage of workers, such as construction, and then there'll probably be opportunities in the energy sector and also potentially in the military procurement production sector going forwards. And so there are ways that targeted investments could be made in in enterprises that could employ the displaced workers.
The basis of your argument is, and this is quoting from the Globe piece,
sure,
we should consider whether it's in the national interest to keep a less competitive industry alive at the expense of more competitive ones. How do you determine whether it's in the national interest to keep something like the auto sector afloat?
That's a great question. I mean, I think you would look at it in terms of contribution to GDP per capita or GDP in general, national income. I think you'd also want to look at how much government resources are going into supporting the industry, right? I mean, we have huge employment in finance, banking, obviously energy, other sectors in the country that's not getting the same level of support. I mean, an option that the Australians took was to say, we're going to end this support, and if the industry winds down, we're going to let that happen. It's not like you shut the industry down, you just don't interfere. And then instead you can bring in low-cost cars from suppliers around the world. I mean, for example, we have a 100% tax on Chinese EVs right now. We could get rid of that. If the Americans, if this is not currying favor with the Americans, we could get rid of that, bring in low-cost Chinese EVs, and that would be good for the environment. So I think you have to look at the whole picture.
Was there something that came out of this in Australia when their auto sector shuttered? Was there some new industry that suddenly was invested in that sprung up?
I wouldn't say there was a new industry, but the sectors like mining, banking, tourism, higher education is a big industry in Australia. It is in Canada also. I mean, all these industries tend to absorb workers, some more easily than others, admittedly. You can have big drops in salaries after you're laid off from a manufacturing job in a traditional sector. So I am sympathetic to the workers, but that's how they would have dealt with it.
Vito said he'd like to sit down with you and talk about this. And I think one of the things that he might raise is just the scale of what we're talking about here. The Trillium Network for Advanced Manufacturing says that Canada's vehicle assembly industry contributed $7.8 billion to our economy, employed almost 47,000 people. The vehicle auto parts manufacturing industry added an $11.3 billion to our GDP and employed another 72,000 Canadians. Where are those people going to go? Those are huge numbers, right?
They are huge numbers, but as a percentage of the economy, like I said, it's under 1%. So, it is a big economy to absorb workers into. And I'm not trying to trivialize what the individual families and people are going to go through. But, And as I said earlier, I think we do have labor shortages. I mean, at the same time as we hear about these issues, we're being told we need temporary foreign workers because we can't fill positions. So, I mean, my position is I think we should rely on immigration, permanent immigration, rely less on temporary foreign workers, and then let labor markets allocate workers to different jobs in the sectors that are growing with, supporting the firms that have a strong case and a strong business model. And I should say, I mean, it's not fair to these workers. It's nothing that they've done. It's nothing that, the Canadian, management has obviously done in these cases. But we have to be realistic. We have an asymmetric trading relationship with the Americans. We need them a lot more than they need us. I think, the comments you made or the questions you made suggested what I think is true, that it's not clear that the Americans are going to back down on this. And so it may be that, I would rather see the Canadian auto industry continue. I think it does contribute importantly to the Canadian economy. I think if we have to make concessions, and I think the other point that's worth raising is that, the USMCA is still making most of these goods exempt. Like over 90%, there's a 25% tariff on Canadian cars and auto parts, but currently not to USMCA exempt goods, which is over 90%, I understand, of auto production in Canada. So a lot of this is happening just from the threat of tariffs. The tariffs haven't even happened. Now we're going into a new round of negotiation on USMCA. Who knows what's going to happen? But maybe it would be better to give up supply management, which I think is a much more dubious economic prospect, but something that has become kind of a sacred thing in Canada amongst politicians, at least. So I'm not saying we wind down the auto sector, but I think we should be very careful before we bail it out if it's facing, prohibitive tariffs from the U.S.
Well, we just have a couple of minutes left. End on that. I mean, whether, and this is the point that I made to Vito, whether people agree with it or not, it appears that Donald Trump is changing the global economy.
Yes.
And that has long-term impacts. Do we need to start making, do you think, as a nation, really hard choices? You now see, we talked about this yesterday on the program, you have premiers from Manitoba and Saskatchewan who are saying, yeah, lift those EV tariffs because our canola farmers are getting hammered. You have folks in British Columbia who are worried about softwood lumber. In Quebec, certainly, and parts of Ontario as well, supply management is a vital issue for farmers there. Are we going to need to make hard choices to figure out how we survive in what feels like a very different world?
I think that's right. I think what's really unusual about this sort of second Trump presidency is this commitment to asymmetry, this idea that, the Americans put tariffs on other countries, but they get very upset if the other country reciprocates. That seems new, and I think we may just have to accept that we're going to be looking at some tariffs on some sectors in order, and we won't be able to respond strategically just to try to maintain free trade in other areas. That's why I think what Premier Ford is saying is potentially quite dangerous. We could
the idea of fighting back.
Yeah, a huge trade war would be potentially devastating to the Canadian economy. So I think these hard choices, I agree, we're going to have to make hard choices. And, just to finish, one option we have is to be a true free trading country and not what
does that mean?
Well, a place like Singapore, for example, has a very high GDP per capita, much higher than Canada's. But they basically say they're not putting in tariffs on anything. Even if you tariff them, they're not going to tariff in response. And a lot of the gains, there are definite gains from free trade to potentially everyone. But it's not just from exports being tariff-free, it's also from our imports being tariff-free. And so we have control over that. We could decide we're not going to have tariffs because we want to have low-cost goods coming into the country. But politically, we have to get Canadians to the point of agreeing with that, I think.
Christopher, good to talk to you. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Christopher Worswick is a professor of economics at Carleton University. He was in our Ottawa studio. You've been listening to The Current Podcast. My name is Matt Galloway. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you soon.